In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world seems briefly paused and still, the inner landscape of the human mind often reveals itself with an unsettling clarity. It is in these moments, between sleep and waking, between thought and silence, that one may catch glimpses of a deeper truth, that much of our suffering is not born of the world, but of the patterns within our own minds. These patterns or mental habits shape our perception, guide our actions, and form the scaffolding upon which the self, that most persistent illusion, is constructed. The Buddha, more than 2.5 millennia ago, offered a radical insight. Suffering is not random, nor is it the will of gods. It is caused. And what causes it, more than any external force, are the habitual ways in which we relate to our experience, through clinging, aversion, and ignorance. These are not merely moods or passing tendencies. They are grooves etched deeply into the fabric of consciousness, reinforced over lifetimes, fed by fear, desire, and a profound misapprehension of reality. From the moment we awaken each day, the mind springs into motion. Thoughts arise unbidden, memories stir, judgments form, desires beckon. We chase one thought, suppress another, all while maintaining the illusion that there is a central I directing this orchestra. But as we begin to observe more carefully, through the practice of mindfulness or meditative inquiry, we start to see that much of this mental activity is not willed, but conditioned. It repeats in loops, plays familiar scripts, reacts in predictable ways. The self we take to be so solid is in fact a collage of habits, some inherited, some learned, and many unconscious. In the teachings of the Buddha, these habits are often referred to as sankharas, mental formations or volitional activities. They are the second link in the chain of dependent origination, which describes how suffering arises. These sankharas shape consciousness itself, coloring the way we experience the world. Like tinted glasses, they do not simply alter the content of thought, but the very tone and texture of being. Consider the habit of grasping, a subtle tightening around pleasant experiences, a leaning toward that which we think will satisfy. It is not just about wanting a new possession or achievement. It is about the way the mind clings to an idea, a self-image, a moment of pleasure. This grasping, born of craving, generates a false sense of continuity. We begin to believe in a me that wants, a me that feels, a me that suffers. Yet when we look more closely, we find no enduring entity behind these experiences. There is wanting, yes, but no wanter. There is suffering, but no fixed sufferer. This insight, subtle and difficult to grasp, is at the heart of the Buddha's teaching. The self, as we ordinarily conceive it, a solid, unchanging core, is a construction. It is maintained through repetitive mental patterns that reinforce the illusion of permanence and identity. Each time we say, "I am angry," we are not merely describing a passing state. We are affirming a belief in an owner of that anger. But in the light of awareness, anger is seen as an impersonal process. It arises, it peaks, it fades. It is known. And that which knows it, the clear, open awareness, is not the self, but the very absence of self. To begin unraveling these deeply ingrained mental habits, the Buddha prescribed a path, not of belief, but of direct investigation. This is the Eightfold Path, a way of living and perceiving that gradually loosens the knots of delusion. At its core is mindfulness, the practice of sustained, non-judgmental attention to the present moment. When we observe our thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations without grasping or pushing away, we begin to see their impermanent and conditioned nature. In doing so, we start to disidentify with them. This disidentification is not a denial of experience, but a liberation from its tyranny. We no longer have to act out every impulse, believe every story the mind tells, or construct a narrative around every emotion. Slowly we gain space. A thought arises, "I'm not good enough," and instead of reacting or spiraling, we see it for what it is, a mental formation, conditioned by past experiences, perhaps by voices we absorbed as children, but not inherently true, and more importantly, not ours in the way we assumed. As we continue this inner inquiry, another realization dawns. These mental habits do not exist in isolation. They are relational, shaped in dialogue with the world and with others. The self is not merely internal. It is co-created. The way we are spoken to, looked at, expected to behave, all contribute to the architecture of our identity. And thus, to change our mental habits is also to engage with the world differently, to listen more openly, to speak more truthfully, to let go of roles that no longer serve. Yet this work is not easy. Mental habits are tenacious precisely because they are unconscious. They thrive in the dark. To bring them to light requires courage, patience, and a kind of fierce gentleness. We must be willing to feel what we have numbed, to question what we have taken for granted, to sit in the fire of discomfort without flinching. Meditation becomes not an escape from life, but a laboratory for seeing how suffering is created and how it can cease. The Buddha likened the mind to a wild elephant, unruly and dangerous when untamed, but capable of great strength and nobility when trained. Our mental habits are the tethers that keep the elephant charging in circles. Through awareness, we gradually untie these knots, allowing the mind to settle, to become still, to see clearly. In that clarity, we begin to taste a freedom that is not dependent on circumstances, a peace that is not fragile, a joy that is not manufactured. And in this unfolding, the self begins to dissolve, not into nothingness but into spaciousness. The boundaries soften. Where once there was "I am this," there is now "this is." Where once there was a clinging to identity, there is now an intimacy with what is. This is not annihilation, but intimacy, not erasure, but openness. The illusion of separation gives way to a sense of deep belonging, to life, to awareness, to the ever-unfolding present. Thus begins the journey, not toward becoming someone better, but toward realizing there is no one to become. Only this, moment by moment, a letting go, a seeing through, a return to the simplicity of being. This is the wisdom of the Buddha, not a doctrine, but a mirror, not a dogma, but a doorway. And it opens inward into the depths of your own mind, where the roots of suffering lie waiting to be known and gently released. Each thought that arises is like a ripple on the surface of a still pond, but unlike water, which naturally returns to calm when undisturbed, the mind often churns endlessly, stirred not by the present moment, but by memory, projection, and the restlessness of habit. We live, many of us, in the echo chamber of thought, where the past whispers its regrets, the future casts shadows of fear or hope, and the present becomes barely audible beneath the din. This inner chatter is so constant, so familiar, that we rarely pause to question it. We take it as reality. We listen to the voice in the head, the commentator, the critic, the planner, the narrator, and assume it is me. But what if it isn't? What if these thoughts, these stories, these judgments are simply mental phenomena, arising and passing with no one behind them? The Buddha did not speak of the self as a thing, but as a process, a fabrication composed of 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. These aggregates interact, depend on one another, and are constantly changing. Nowhere within them can we find a fixed identity, and yet, through the force of habit, we weave them into a coherent narrative. We tell ourselves, "This is who I am," and proceed to live inside that story. This storytelling mind is not inherently wrong. It evolved to help us survive, to predict, to remember. But when left unchecked, it becomes a prison. It reinforces limiting beliefs, fuels emotional reactivity, and blocks us from experiencing life as it is. The mind becomes addicted to its own content, looping familiar themes. I always fail. They never understand me. If only things were different. These are not just sentences, they are mental grooves, and the more we think them, the deeper they get. Such grooves are what Buddhist psychology refers to as anusaya, latent tendencies, sleeping seeds that lie dormant until triggered. Anger, fear, craving, jealousy. Each has its root in these latent tendencies, and thought is often their vehicle. We don't just feel anger, we think our way into it, justify it, rehearse it. We don't merely experience desire, we fantasize, obsess, replay scenarios. The mind takes a raw sensation and spins it into a whole web of meaning, identity, and craving. If we are to dismantle the illusion of self and lessen suffering, we must come to see how thought operates, not to stop it, but to understand it. Meditation offers us a direct path into this seeing. When we sit in stillness and silence, the contents of the mind begin to surface. At first, it may seem chaotic, a flood of thoughts, feelings, distractions, but over time, a pattern emerges. We start to notice the mind's preferred themes, its favorite obsessions, its fears, its longings. What we observe is often sobering. The mind does not gravitate toward peace on its own. Left alone, it spins narratives of self-importance or self-hatred. It rehearses conversations, anticipates problems, replays insults. It clings to the past, frets over the future, and resists the now. And underneath it all is a quiet terror of not being in control, of being nobody, of the groundlessness that comes when thought loses its grip. This fear is key. For the ego, the sense of self, is built from thought. And when we begin to question or deconstruct those thoughts, the ego trembles. It senses its own impermanence. This is why mindfulness, while simple, is not easy. To sit with awareness and watch thoughts come and go without identifying with them is to unsettle the very structure of the self. It is to stop feeding the illusion. Yet there is immense freedom in this. When we see a thought as just a thought, without the weight of belief or the need to act on it, it loses its grip. "I'm a failure" becomes no more significant than "it might rain today." The mind becomes a passing show, and we, as awareness, remain untouched. This is not indifference, but clarity. We begin to respond, not react. We act from presence, not programming. In this clarity, a deep compassion also arises. We see that others, too, are trapped in their own echo chambers. They act out of fear, insecurity, woundedness, just as we do. When we realize that the self is a conditioned construct, we no longer need to defend it so fiercely. We don't take things so personally. We can listen without needing to be right. We can love without needing to possess. We can forgive, not because others deserve it, but because we no longer carry the burden of identification. The echo chamber of thought thrives on resistance. Whatever we resist, pain, uncertainty, shame, gets louder. The mind circles it, pokes it, tries to fix or avoid it. But the Buddha taught another way, the way of acceptance, of non-clinging. This doesn't mean passivity. It means opening fully to what is, without resistance or attachment. It means recognizing that thoughts are not the enemy, but believing them unexamined can be. This is not achieved through force, but through gentle perseverance, through daily remembering, through inquiry, through stillness. The path is subtle, but the fruits are real. A mind less tormented by its own noise, a heart less weighed down by its own story, a life lived more fully in the luminous now. And so the journey continues, not outward but inward, not toward a goal, but into the silence beneath thought, into the groundless ground of being, where the self dissolves and only presence remains. From the moment we are born, a longing stirs within us, a reaching, a yearning, an ache. It shows itself first in the body, in the hunger for food, warmth, touch. But as we grow, that hunger transforms. It turns inward, taking the shape of desire, of wanting, of perpetual seeking. We search for comfort, for status, for love, for recognition. And behind all this seeking lies a subtle belief that if we just get the right thing, if we achieve, possess, win, or finally arrive, we will be at peace. This longing, so deeply woven into the human experience, is what the Buddha called tanha, craving. It is the second noble truth, the engine of suffering. Craving in all its forms is not merely wanting. It is the compulsive, almost reflexive tendency to seek completion outside of the present moment. It is the sense that something is missing and that something else, out there, in the future, in someone else's hands, will fill the void. But the tragedy of craving is that it is never finally satisfied. One desire leads to the next, and even when fulfilled, the pleasure is short-lived. The mind quickly moves on to another object of pursuit, a new goal, a new image, a new high. We live in a kind of trance, chasing shadows, mistaking the mirage for the oasis. And each time the illusion fades, we are left again with that familiar dissatisfaction. This is not a failure of willpower or discipline. It is the nature of craving itself, to promise satisfaction and deliver only a deeper hunger. The Buddha saw this clearly and taught it without compromise. Craving leads to suffering. Not because pleasure is bad, but because clinging to pleasure and believing it will grant us lasting peace is a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. Everything that arises passes away. Every sensation, every thought, every possession, every relationship, impermanent, shifting, uncertain. To cling to these as sources of identity or happiness is to fight the nature of things. And that fight is what generates the tension we call suffering. This suffering is not always loud. Often it is subtle, a restlessness, a dissatisfaction, a vague anxiety that something isn't quite right. Even when life is good, there can be a quiet unease beneath the surface. This is dukkha, the first noble truth. Not just obvious pain, but the inherent unsatisfactoriness of conditioned existence. And at its root is the mind's habit of craving. We don't merely crave objects or people, we crave experiences, emotional states, even ideas of who we should be. We crave being seen a certain way, living up to an internal image, fulfilling some idealized version of ourselves. And we fear its opposite, rejection, failure, loss. So we become trapped in a constant dance, reaching, avoiding, performing, protecting. All of it reinforces the sense of a self that needs, that lacks, that must become. This is the mirage, the belief that the self is a stable thing and that it can finally be made whole through external means. But what if this very sense of self is built upon the scaffolding of craving? What if, beneath the wanting, there is no core person, no fixed identity, only a stream of sensations, thoughts, and reactions shaped by habit? In meditation, we can begin to see this directly. A desire arises, perhaps for food, attention, escape. If we pause and look, we notice it is not a solid thing. It comes as a sensation in the body, a tightening, a stirring. Then a thought forms. I want this. Perhaps an image appears, a story, and with it a subtle sense of self, as if the one who wants has emerged, real and urgent. But if we stay present and just observe, we notice the craving passes. It dissolves, changes, loses its pull. And when it goes, where is the self who wanted? Gone with the desire, replaced now by another state, another thought. This is the insight that begins to free us. Craving gives rise not only to suffering, but to the illusion of self. Every time we grasp at something, we are also constructing a me who grasps. And every time we resist something, we construct a me who is threatened. But these selves are momentary. They arise with the craving and fade with it. They are not fixed identities, but passing mental constructions. Understanding this does not mean we must give up all desires or live in renunciation. Rather, it means we meet desire with awareness. We don't chase it blindly or suppress it with force. We inquire, we feel it fully, observe its movement and ask, what am I really seeking? What do I think this will give me? Often beneath surface cravings lies a deeper longing for safety, connection, significance, peace. And even deeper than that, perhaps, is the longing to simply be. The practice is not to annihilate desire, but to untangle it, to separate the natural human impulse for joy or intimacy from the compulsive need to complete an imagined self. When we see that the sense of me and the craving are co-arising, we can begin to loosen the knot. We rest in awareness. We feel the pull. We don't act immediately. We allow space, and in that space, freedom begins. There is an exquisite paradox here. The more we allow things to be as they are, the less we need them to be different. The more we let go of needing life to fulfill our image of how it should be, the more life begins to feel full. Not because it gives us everything we want, but because we are no longer enslaved by want. Peace becomes available, not as a reward for achievement, but as the absence of inner struggle. This peace is not passive, it is alive, clear, awake. It allows us to move in the world, to love, to create, to act, but from wholeness, not lack. We can still set goals, make plans, enjoy pleasures, but we are no longer fooled by the promise of completion. We know that true satisfaction is not in the object, but in the release of clinging. Not in getting what we want, but in knowing who we are beyond wanting. The Buddha taught that when craving ceases, suffering ceases. This is the third noble truth. Not a future achievement, but a possibility in this very moment. Every time we see through a craving, we taste this cessation. Every time we disidentify from a desire and rest in awareness, we experience a glimpse of freedom. And so the path unfolds, not by reaching for more, but by returning again and again to what is already here. To this breath, this body, this moment. No craving needed, no self to fix. Just being as it is. Enough. If craving is the movement of the mind toward, then aversion is the movement of the mind away. It is the inner recoil from discomfort, from pain, from that which threatens our sense of safety or stability. While craving whispers, "I must have this," aversion hisses, "I must not feel this." Both are sides of the same coin, each rooted in reactivity, each reinforcing the illusion of a self that must be protected, fulfilled, or defended. Aversion takes many forms. Sometimes it's as obvious as anger or disgust. Other times it slips in quietly as irritation, boredom, tension, or a subtle sense of unease. At its core, aversion is resistance, an unwillingness to be with things as they are. We push against our experience, trying to escape the unpleasant, deny the painful, or control the uncontrollable. This resistance may feel natural, even necessary, but it is one of the most potent sources of suffering. The Buddha recognized aversion, dosa in Pali, as one of the three root defilements of the mind, alongside greed and delusion. It clouds our vision, distorts our thoughts, and hardens the heart. But perhaps its most insidious effect is how it shapes and solidifies our identity. Every time we resist a feeling, a situation, or a person, we quietly affirm a self who is separate from and opposed to that experience. We construct an inner fortress, defining ourselves by what we are not, by what we won't tolerate, by what we must keep out. In this way, aversion builds the walls of the ego. I don't like that. I can't stand this. This should not be happening to me. With each resistance, a boundary is drawn, me versus not me, self versus other, right versus wrong. And once the wall is built, the mind becomes a battlefield. Life, with all its unpredictability and impermanence, becomes an ongoing threat to the constructed identity. We fight reality, and in doing so, exhaust ourselves. But reality does not yield to our preferences. Pain will come, loss will come. Aging, sickness, disappointment, these are not personal failures, but conditions of existence. The more we resist them, the more we suffer. The more we soften around them, the more we see that suffering is not inherent in pain itself, but in the mind's reaction to pain. This is a crucial distinction. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. In meditation, this becomes vividly clear. We sit, intending perhaps to find peace, and soon discomfort arises, a tightness in the back, a throbbing in the knees, a wave of restlessness. The mind immediately reacts. This shouldn't be happening. We shift, fidget, analyze, escape into thought. But if we stay still and observe, a new possibility arises. We begin to feel the raw sensations without labeling or resisting. We see that they change, pulse, move. And more surprisingly, we discover that we can be present with them. We don't die from the discomfort. It doesn't define us. It passes. This is not about becoming numb or stoic, but about cultivating equanimity, a balanced, spacious awareness that neither clings nor resists. Equanimity does not mean apathy. It means intimacy without entanglement. It is the deep knowing that we can meet pain without collapsing into it or turning it into a story of me. The stories we tell about our pain are often more damaging than the pain itself. A feeling of sadness arises, and instead of simply feeling it, we add layers. Why am I always like this? What's wrong with me? I shouldn't feel this way. These thoughts become habits, mental grooves that reinforce a wounded self-image. But if we can stay with the pure experience, just sadness, just tightness in the chest, just the heaviness behind the eyes, we begin to separate the emotion from the identity. We realize this is sadness, not my sadness. This is anger, not me being angry. In that shift, freedom begins. Aversion is also deeply tied to fear. We resist, not just because something is unpleasant, but because it threatens our imagined control. Fear whispers that we are fragile, that if we fully feel what's here, we will be overwhelmed or destroyed. And so we armor ourselves, through denial, through distraction, through judgment. But what we fear to feel will always control us from the shadows. The only way out is through. The Buddha compared unexamined aversion to holding a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone. We burn ourselves first. Anger, hatred, resentment, these mental states may seem justified, even righteous, but they are poison to the heart. They divide, isolate, and close us off from the flow of life. They harden the illusion of a separate self, a self who is right, a self who has been wronged, a self who must be defended at all costs. To release this grip, we do not need to suppress aversion, but to meet it with mindfulness. We acknowledge it, feel it in the body, investigate its roots. We may ask, what am I trying to avoid right now? What belief or fear is fueling this resistance? Often, we find a wounded part of ourselves beneath the surface, something tender, unhealed, unmet. Aversion is the mind's way of protecting what it perceives as vulnerable. But protection through resistance only leads to more fragmentation. True healing comes from inclusion. This is the essence of compassion. Not just a feeling, but a practice of turning toward what we habitually turn away from. When we meet our own pain with kindness, we stop needing to project it onto others. We stop needing enemies, scapegoats, or dramas to explain our suffering. We take responsibility, not in the sense of blame, but in the sense of responsibility, the ability to respond with wisdom, not reactivity. And as we do, the walls of identity begin to soften. The fixed roles, the defensive postures, the rigid self-images, they start to crumble. We become more fluid, more responsive, more alive. We realize that we don't have to define ourselves by our wounds or preferences. We are not the sum of our aversions. We are the awareness in which aversion arises and passes, untouched. This shift is not sudden. It is a gradual process, a retraining of attention, but every moment of mindful presence weakens the old patterns. Every time we sit with discomfort instead of fleeing it, we unlearn a little of the self. Every time we speak with gentleness instead of lashing out, we remember our true nature, not fixed, not separate, but interconnected and vast. So the path unfolds, not through heroic effort, but through honest seeing. through sitting in the fire of resistance and discovering that we are not consumed by it, through letting go of control and discovering a deeper safety in surrender, through touching the pain of the moment and finding within it the quiet light of awareness, steady, open, free. Thus we begin to dismantle the second great architect of the self, aversion, not by force but by love, not by rejection but by inclusion. We reclaim the fullness of our humanity, not as a perfected self, but as a field of living presence in which all things arise and pass. And in that field, we begin to glimpse the truth the Buddha pointed to, that there is no solid self to defend, only a luminous space in which life is experienced deeply, completely, and with peace. In the earliest Buddhist teachings, the root of all suffering is named not as pain or craving, nor even aversion, but as avidya, ignorance. This ignorance is not a simple lack of information. It is a fundamental not seeing, a pervasive blindness woven into the way we perceive reality. It is ignorance not of facts, but of truth, a truth that is right before our eyes yet rarely recognized. It is this ignorance, the Buddha taught, that gives rise to all mental formations, to craving, to rebirth, to suffering. Without it, the wheel of becoming would cease. But what is it we are not seeing? We do not see the impermanence of all things. We do not see that nothing, not even our thoughts or sense of self, endures for more than a moment. We do not see the interdependence of all phenomena, that nothing exists on its own, apart from everything else. We do not see the absence of a fixed, separate self. And because we do not see these truths, we live as though permanence were possible, as though separation were real, as though the I, at the center of our experience, were a solid and unchanging entity. This not seeing is subtle. It hides in our habits of mind, in the unquestioned assumptions that underlie our every decision. We believe, for instance, that I am thinking, and as though there is a thinker behind the thoughts. But upon investigation, thought arises on its own, dependent on conditions. Memories, language, mood, past experiences, all come together to form a thought. No central author is found. Still, the illusion persists, because it is not just conceptual, it is felt, embodied, lived. The self feels real because ignorance is not simply in the mind, but in perception itself. The world appears as subject and object, as me and other, as inner and outer. This duality feels obvious, but it is conditioned. It is learned. A baby does not yet see the world this way. Over time, the mind constructs the categories, the language, the filters. Eventually, the child learns to say I, and the self-image begins to form. But it is just that, an image, a story, a projection. This illusion of self is perpetuated by mental habits that are rarely brought into awareness. The constant commentary, the internal judgment, the narrative of me and mine, all of these are rooted in ignorance. They function automatically below the level of conscious reflection. It is like a dream we don't know we're dreaming. And like a dream, it feels entirely convincing until we begin to wake up. The Buddhist path is, in essence, a process of waking up, not to a new belief, but to the truth of what is already here. This awakening begins with mindfulness, with the simple, radical act of paying attention. When we observe the mind without clinging or resistance, we begin to see its patterns. We begin to notice how quickly thoughts arise, how feelings come and go, how identification happens. We catch ourselves saying, I am angry, and then ask, who is angry? Where is this I? In the early stages, this inquiry can feel disorienting. The mind may resist. The sense of self is deeply defended. It has been with us for so long, whispering promises of control, continuity, and identity. To question it is to shake the very ground we stand on. But if we stay with the inquiry, with gentleness and curiosity, a space opens. We begin to glimpse the difference between awareness and its contents, between the knowing and what is known. This gap is the beginning of wisdom. The Buddha often used the word prajna, or penetrating insight to describe the quality of mind that sees through illusion. It is not intellectual, it is intuitive, direct. Like waking from a dream, it happens not through effort alone, but through a shift in perception, and yet we can cultivate the conditions for it. Mindfulness, ethical conduct, concentration. These quiet the noise and allow the deeper seeing to arise. One of the most powerful insights that emerges is the recognition of impermanence, anicca. Everything we cling to, everything we fear, everything we identify with is in flux. The body ages, sensations shift, thoughts flicker, relationships evolve. Even joy, even sorrow are not static. And yet the mind, driven by ignorance, tries to hold on. It freezes a moment in time and says, "This is me, this is mine," but nothing stays. The wave returns to the ocean. To see impermanence is to begin to loosen the grip of self, for if nothing remains, how can there be a self that is always the same? We begin to see the absurdity of clinging, the futility of resistance. The heart softens, fear diminishes. There is still pain, but it is no longer amplified by the illusion that it is happening to a permanent me. It is just pain, arising and passing, known by awareness. Another veil lifted by wisdom is the illusion of separateness. We walk through the world assuming a boundary between self and other, but where is that boundary? The skin, the thoughts, the memories, all of it is porous. Our breath comes from trees, our language from others, our feelings are shaped in relationship. We are not alone, nor have we ever been. The self is not a thing, but a web, fluid, responsive, dependent on countless causes and conditions. This interdependence is not merely philosophical, it can be felt. In deep states of meditation, or even in moments of awe, the boundaries dissolve. The sense of I fades, and what remains is presence, vast and intimate. There is no longer me meditating. There is just the breath, the sound of the birds, the play of light and shadow. Awareness becomes panoramic, open, undivided. This is not annihilation, but release, the dropping of the burden of self. Yet ignorance returns. Like clouds covering the sun, it obscures the light. The old patterns reassert themselves: judgment, reactivity, grasping. This is not failure. It is the nature of the path. Awakening is not a one-time event, but a process, a spiral, a deepening. Each moment of seeing through illusion, each moment of disidentifying from thought, is a step toward liberation. The great challenge is that ignorance feels normal. It wears the mask of familiarity, but the practice, moment by moment, is to question that familiarity, to turn inward, to observe, to gently ask, is this true? Is this self as solid as it seems? And more importantly, what happens when I let it go? Letting go of ignorance does not mean attaining special knowledge. It means seeing clearly. It means dwelling in awareness rather than in stories. It means trusting the direct experience of now before the mind names, claims, and divides it. In this seeing, compassion naturally arises. For when we realize our own illusions, we understand the illusions of others. We stop demanding perfection. We begin to forgive. The veil of ignorance is thick, but not impenetrable. Each act of mindfulness, each moment of honesty, each breath taken in awareness is a small tear in the fabric. Over time, the light of wisdom shines through. We see the world not through the lens of self, but through the clarity of presence. We relate not as egos defending their ground, but as beings meeting in shared mystery. And so the journey continues, not toward becoming more, but toward seeing more clearly. Not toward constructing a better self, but toward dismantling the scaffolding of illusion. In the light of this seeing, the self begins to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into vastness, into peace, into the unshakable freedom that the Buddha called nibbana, the extinguishing not of life, but of delusion. This is the liberation awaiting not somewhere else, not at the end of a long path, but here, in the simple, naked awareness of what is. To see it, we need only look, not with the eyes of the self, but with the eyes of wisdom. The mind is always forming identities. It does this not out of malice or confusion, but out of habit. Like a spider weaving its web, it spins thread after thread of I, me, and mine, latching onto thoughts, emotions, sensations, memories. These threads seem harmless, casual thoughts like I'm tired, I'm not good at this, or I love music. But over time they bind. They shape the contours of who we believe we are. This habit of identification is so deeply ingrained that we rarely notice it. We identify with our bodies, our names, our roles. We identify with our opinions, our moods, our pasts. We even identify with our suffering, my trauma, my anxiety, my failure. And each time we do, the illusion of a solid, ongoing self grows a little stronger. It becomes the lens through which we see everything else. And in that narrowing, we suffer. The Buddha saw this tendency and called it upadana, clinging or grasping. But this grasping is not just toward objects of desire or resistance, it's also toward identity itself. The mind craves continuity, a sense of being someone, even if that someone is deeply unhappy. Better a known identity, the mind whispers, than the vast unknown. And so we latch on. We say, this is me, and defend it. We say, this happened to me, and carry it for years. But what is this me we're so certain of? The Buddha offered a radical challenge. Look directly, don't believe, don't assume, examine. And when we do, we begin to see that what we call self is not a single thing, but a shifting collection of processes. Today's self is not yesterday's. The way we think, speak, and feel changes depending on mood, environment, and memory. One moment we are confident, the next we are fearful. One moment we feel generous, the next we are defensive. Yet the illusion persists that there is one enduring I behind it all. This illusion is fueled by identification. Identification is more than labeling. It is ownership. It is the internal gesture of claiming experience. I am this, or this is happening to me. In that gesture, awareness collapses into story. The open space of consciousness narrows, and the self returns to center stage. But if we slow down and observe carefully, we can begin to notice this gesture as it happens. We can see how the mind subtly takes hold of a feeling and builds identity around it. Consider anger. In one moment, a flash of irritation arises, heat in the chest, tension in the jaw, a quickening of the heart. That is the raw data. But almost immediately, the mind says, I'm angry, and begins to narrate, they shouldn't have done that. I always get treated this way. This is so unfair. Now the feeling has become a story, and the story has become an identity. The original anger may pass quickly, but the identification can linger for hours, days, even years. Or consider sadness. A wave of melancholy arises, perhaps with no clear reason. The body slumps, the breath slows. If met with awareness, this can be felt gently, held in presence. But when identification sets in, the mind weaves a narrative. I am depressed. This always happens. There's something wrong with me. A temporary mood becomes a fixed self-image. And with that identity, a whole world of limitation is born. This is the power of identification. It creates a reality, not because it reflects truth, but because we live according to the stories we believe. If I believe I am unworthy, I see evidence of it everywhere. If I believe I am a victim, the world appears hostile. If I believe I am successful, I cling to that image and fear its loss. Each identity becomes a filter, distorting perception, generating suffering. But what if we don't identify? This is not detachment in the cold or aloof sense. It is disidentification, a recognition that the contents of experience are not the self. The thoughts, the emotions, the sensations, even the roles we play. These are all part of the flow of life. They are known, observed, impermanent. They arise in awareness, but they are not the awareness itself. This is the key insight of anatta, or not self. Not that there is no person at all, but that there is no fixed, independent, unchanging self behind experience. What we call me is a process, not a thing. And when we stop clinging to that process as identity, suffering diminishes, space opens, freedom arises. In practice, disidentification begins with awareness. When a thought arises, I can't do this, we notice it. We don't suppress it, nor do we merge with it. We see it as a thought, a passing mental event. When fear arises, we feel it in the body. We watch its movement. We say, fear is here, not I am afraid. This subtle shift of language reflects a profound shift of consciousness. It moves us from entanglement to clarity. This clarity deepens with meditation. As we sit and observe the mind, we see how often it grasps at identity. It clings to preferences, defends opinions, replays roles. Each time we bring attention back to the breath, to the body, to bare awareness, we unhook a little from those patterns. We learn to let experience arise and pass without turning it into a self. This is not about erasing personality or denying humanity. The Buddha himself spoke, laughed, cried. He lived in the world, related with others, taught with warmth and compassion, but he was no longer bound by identification. He saw clearly that the self was a useful fiction, not to be believed, but not to be destroyed either. It could be played with lightly, like a mask that's worn but not mistaken for the face. In our lives, this lightness is transformative. We begin to show up not as roles, but as presence. We listen without needing to be right. We act without needing recognition. We feel without needing to collapse. The story of self becomes transparent, still appearing but no longer confining. And from this openness, a deeper love emerges. Not love based on identity or possession, but love rooted in shared being. We see that others too are trapped in their identities. They suffer under the weight of their stories. We no longer take things personally. Their anger is not about us. Their praise is not our worth. Their fear is not our failure. We become less reactive, more forgiving. We relate not self to self, but awareness to awareness. This shift does not happen all at once. It is gradual, like a fog slowly lifting. But each time we disidentify, even slightly, we taste freedom. Each time we see a thought as a thought, a feeling as a feeling, we reclaim the spaciousness of being. We remember that we are not the mask, not the role, not the story. We are that which witnesses it all. The self continues to arise. It is part of the human dance. But we don't have to believe in it as ultimate. We don't have to take it so seriously. We can let it be what it is, a useful illusion, a temporary structure, a way of navigating the world. And we can rest more and more in the unconstructed, unborn silence from which all things arise. This is the freedom the Buddha pointed toward, not a new self, but the end of clinging to self. Not a better story, but the space beyond all stories. In that space, life flows freely. Identity becomes fluid. The heart opens, and what remains is presence, simple, luminous, awake. The mind is a storyteller. It narrates our lives from the moment we wake to the moment we sleep, interpreting, labeling, comparing, judging, remembering, predicting. It talks to itself constantly about what happened, what could happen, what should have happened. It constructs meanings, ties together events, imagines futures, replays pasts. This endless stream of inner dialogue is not merely noise. It is the very fabric from which the sense of I is woven. We rarely question this inner voice. It sounds like us, after all. It uses our language, remembers our history, echoes our fears and hopes. But what we don't often see is that this voice is not a neutral commentator. It is the primary architect of identity. It takes raw experience and overlays it with interpretation. It tells us what things mean, and more importantly, what they mean about us. In this way, thought doesn't just describe the self, it creates it. This is the core of the mental habit known in Buddhism as sankhara, mental formations or volitional fabrications. Sankharas are the patterns of thought, emotion, and reaction shaped by past conditioning. They are not inherently wrong or bad. In fact, they are part of how we function as human beings, but left unseen, they become the machinery of suffering. They operate automatically, reinforcing the illusion of a solid, central me at the heart of experience. The Buddha taught that these fabrications arise in dependence on ignorance. We do not see clearly, and so we construct stories. We fear impermanence, and so we cling to narratives of stability. We fear emptiness, and so we construct a self. The mind, in its insecurity, spins meaning as a way to feel grounded. But this meaning-making comes at a cost. It narrows our view of reality, reducing the vastness of experience to a script we already know. Consider how quickly the mind interprets. A person doesn't return a greeting, and the thought arises, they must be upset with me. A project doesn't succeed, and the thought, I always fail. A compliment is given, and the thought, they don't mean it. In each case, a bare event is instantly absorbed into a story. The mind rarely leaves anything unadorned. It adds itself to every moment, coloring it, owning it, narrating it. This happened to me, it says. This is about me. And thus the self reaffirms itself again and again. Even in meditation, we find the storyteller at work. We sit in silence, and the mind spins. I'm not doing this right. This is boring. I should be more focused. Or it drifts into memory and fantasy, rewriting conversations, solving problems, imagining pleasures. These thoughts are not the enemy, but the way we relate to them often is. We believe them, we follow them, we become them. In doing so, we lose the present moment to the dream of identity. The practice, then, is not to stop thought. The mind will think, this is its nature. Rather, the practice is to see thought, to know it as thought, to recognize its movement, its tone, its patterns. We begin to watch the storyteller without becoming the story. A thought arises, I'm not enough. And instead of merging with it, we say, there's the old story. We meet it with curiosity, with kindness, with space. In that moment, we are free. This freedom does not require the disappearance of thoughts. It requires only the cessation of identification with them. The thoughts can arise, dance, speak, but we are not pulled into the theater. We remain seated in awareness, observing the show with calm detachment. And the more we do this, the more transparent the stories become. We begin to see how much of our suffering is not caused by events, but by the narratives we construct around them. This insight can be both liberating and humbling. It shows us that we are not at the mercy of circumstances, but also not in control of reality in the way we thought. We cannot dictate what happens, but we can shape how we relate to what happens. We can meet life not through the filter of story, but through the freshness of presence. This is where the teachings on right view and right thought in the Noble Eightfold Path come alive. Right view is not merely having correct beliefs. It is seeing clearly, seeing beyond the stories, seeing impermanence, interdependence, and not self. Right thought is not about thinking positively, but about cultivating thoughts rooted in compassion, renunciation, and understanding rather than delusion, craving, and aversion. But the old mental habits are persistent. They echo early conditioning, cultural narratives, ancestral fears. You must succeed. You are not lovable. You must be better than others. You're falling behind. These are not universal truths. They are inherited scripts. They served a purpose once, maybe, but often they no longer serve. They constrict the heart. They separate us from others. They keep us running in circles, trying to become someone we already believe we're not. And so, the work is this: to question the narrator, to pause before believing every thought, to feel into the body, into the breath, into the simplicity of what is, before layering it with what it means, to see the story-making mind not as a problem, but as a function of survival that can be gently unlearned, not by suppression, but by presence. In silence, in solitude, in stillness, the storyteller grows quieter. The space between thoughts begins to widen. And in that space we meet something more real than any thought. We meet awareness itself, spacious, luminous, non-judging. We discover that awareness is not a thought, not a self. It is the clear field in which all stories arise and fall away. It does not need a self to exist. It simply knows. From this place, life becomes lighter. We still think, speak, act. We still play roles and hold preferences, but we are no longer trapped. The story continues, but it no longer owns us. We live with clarity, not because we have rewritten the story of self, but because we have seen through it. The Buddha was called the one who knows, not because he knew all facts, but because he knew the mind. He knew its habits, its deceptions, its tricks, and he knew the way beyond them. Mindfulness, wisdom, compassion, and direct seeing. These are the tools we use to disentangle from thought, to see the self as a mental formation, and to return to what is always here, spacious, open, free. This is not the end of thought, but the end of bondage to thought, not the end of story, but the beginning of freedom within it. In that freedom, the self loses its weight. Life returns to its natural simplicity, and we discover not a new version of ourselves, but the unconditioned presence that was never separate from us to begin with. There comes a moment on the path, not sudden, not spectacular, but deeply quiet, when the scaffolding of the self begins to lose its power, not because the ego has been conquered, not because desire has been completely extinguished, and not because pain has disappeared, but because the practitioner has begun to see clearly. And in that seeing, the mind no longer clings so tightly. The old narratives arise, but they are not believed. The emotional waves come, but they do not drown. Experience continues, but it is no longer owned. This is the beginning of true freedom. For so long, we believed that freedom would come from having control over our minds, our emotions, our circumstances. We imagined that once we got the right life, the right partner, the right practice, the right mood, we would be at peace. But what the Buddha taught is far more radical and far more immediate. Peace does not come from getting what we want. It comes from letting go of the one who wants. The self, as we've seen, is a mental habit. It is created moment by moment through craving, aversion, ignorance, identification, and story-making. It is not evil. It's not something to hate or destroy, but it is something to understand, because once it is understood, it is no longer believed. And what is not believed can no longer bind. The unconstructed self is not a new identity. It is not a spiritual persona or a special state of being. It is what remains when the mind stops building, defending, narrating. It is the simple presence that was always here, but obscured by the structures we mistook for reality. It is openness. It is awareness. It is life itself, unfiltered. And it is not far away. It is not something we achieve through perfection, effort, or transcendence. It is revealed through surrender, humility, and deep listening. The more we quiet the mind, the more clearly we hear the silence beneath thought. The more we soften our grip on self, the more tenderly we feel the pulse of existence. The more we let go, the more we arrive, not somewhere else, but right here. Here in this breath, here in this fleeting sound, here in the play of light on a wall, here in a feeling rising and passing through the chest. Liberation is not a dramatic event. It is a subtle undoing. It is the fading of illusion, not the arrival at a final truth. It is the release of effort, not the attainment of a goal. And when it dawns, there is nothing to say, no one to claim it. Just the natural ease of being, a life lived without clinging to self. But even this insight can become another identity, another story. The mind may latch onto, I am free, or I am awakened. And so the practice continues, not to attain, but to stay awake. Not to solidify insight, but to deepen intimacy with the changing flow of experience. To walk gently with open hands through a world that is always in flux. The Buddha never taught selflessness as a belief to adopt. He taught it as something to see. He offered tools, mindfulness, investigation, ethical conduct, concentration, not to fix us, but to help us see clearly. And what we see over time is that we were never what we thought. Not the roles, not the memories, not the emotions, not even the body. We are not objects in time. We are the field in which time appears. This does not mean we vanish. It means we are no longer limited. The person remains, a face, a name, a history, but these are seen as appearances, not essence. We play the game of life more freely because we no longer believe we are the pieces. We can laugh at ourselves, we can forgive, we can love without needing to possess. This love too is transformed. No longer based on need or identity, it becomes unconditional. It flows naturally from presence. It sees others not as extensions of our desires or threats to our self-image, but as fellow expressions of the same mystery. Their suffering is no longer separate from ours. Their joy no longer triggers envy. We meet them not as egos, but as awareness, meeting awareness, intimately, gently, truly. In this way, the personal dissolves into the universal, not by denying the human, but by seeing through its imagined walls. The boundaries blur, the need to defend disappears, and what's left is tenderness, groundedness, clarity. In this way, the personal dissolves into the universal, not by denying the human, but by seeing through its imagined walls. The boundaries blur, the need to defend disappears, and what's left is tenderness, groundedness, clarity. Of course, old habits return. The mind reasserts itself. Identification creeps back in. This too is part of the path. The difference now is that we know. We recognize the machinery of self. We catch it earlier with more humor, with less drama. We return to presence more quickly, and even when we fall asleep into the arms of awareness, which never truly forgets. The journey of unmaking the self is endless, because there was never a fixed self to begin with. It is not a linear path. It is more like the unwinding of a spiral. Each turn brings us closer to center, but the circle never tightens completely. There is always more to let go of. There is always more love to find. What the Buddha offered was not a belief system, but a mirror. He said, look, see for yourself. And when we look, honestly, gently, persistently, we begin to see what he saw, that suffering arises from clinging, and clinging arises from illusion. And that freedom is possible not later, but now, not elsewhere, but here. Not for a perfected self, but for the one who no longer needs to be anyone. And so we return to the world, not as someone special, not as someone awakened, but simply as presence embodied. A smile here, a kind word there, a patient silence, a deep breath in the middle of the storm. No grand gestures, just the still, grounded dignity of one who no longer believes in the mask. The self still appears, but it no longer imprisons. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer define. Emotions still surge, but they no longer control. Life continues, but it is now lived freely, without the burden of becoming, without the fear of losing, without the need to be anything other than what is. This is the quiet joy of a mind unentangled, the soft glow of a heart unbound, the peace of one who has stepped out of the dream and into the radiant simplicity of now. No self to defend, no self to fix, just the great unfolding witnessed in stillness and walked with love.